Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Void Wave podcast. We're doing part two of our Hubert Selby Jr. inspired films doubleheader. So last week we did Last Exit to Brooklyn, and today we're going to do Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah, Requiem for a Dream came out in the year 2000 and it was directed by Darren Aronofsky. I don't think I've seen many of his other films. I've seen Black Swan, and I think he also directed The Fountain, which I have not seen, but which was recommended to me a couple of times, so maybe I'll do that sometime. And yeah, it's also based on a novel of Hubert Selby Jr., of course. This novel came out in 1978, which was roughly 14 years after he released his novel For a Last Exit to Brooklyn. And again, Requiem for a Dream is set in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, so this movie is kind of, I wouldn't say it's not a sequel or anything to Last Exit to Brooklyn, but it's in the same area, roughly set at the same time. I think Hubert Selby just kind of wrote about the same set of people, if you will. And it's also in Brooklyn. A lot of it is in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, which is an area that has a lot of Russian immigration, although that's not a feature at all of the movie. But it does have, I would say, some very similar themes to Last Exit to Brooklyn. So it's about four characters who are either junkies or will become junkies during the story. And even though the film is the story is from 1978, the film was shot in 2000, as if it happened in 2000. So there's a few bits in there where say anachronistic. You know, they really are more of a 70s thing than a 2000 thing. So but the film doesn't really settle on any kind of time period. It's a sort of a universal story, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. And there's like a number of things in the movie which feel a little bit out of place if you assume that it's set in the late 90s or early 2000s. But I think it's not that big of a tonal problem, because the whole movie is, of course, as the title suggests, about dreams. And I don't know. I think like this choice to use like props which hint back at the time the novel was written in, that kind of heightens the dream feeling of the whole movie.
Yeah,
at least did for me.
Yeah, like for example, the movie begins with this TV set being stolen, and the TV set is not a 2000s TV set, right? It's like a TV set from many years ago. So there's a bit of that sort of a temporality of the story, as if the story could have happened in kind of any period of time after World War II, I guess. So if it's very hard to talk about these things like 20 years after, but I do remember when this movie came out, and I watched it in the theater, and there was lots of kind of style innovations in this movie, which is not something that we usually talk about. But if you watch this movie today, you'll probably look at all this stuff and think them being like normal things that are part of cinematic narrative and filmmaking, but that at the time they were very innovative. Like, for example, when you have like a series of actions, routine actions, and they're shot in very fast cuts. And we see this a lot in this movie when they're preparing to shoot heroin. And you have like these very close-in shots of actions happening. So this was something that I don't remember it happening before this movie came out. There was also the use of very portable cameras on a body harness, kind of facing the characters. And you would see them running, and then you see like their panicked face or their face exerting themselves as they run. So once again, I think this was the first movie that had that. And there was like using fast motion instead of montage to show time going past very quickly. So all this stuff kind of came out, was very innovative when the movie came out, and the soundtrack, which became used and abused throughout the next 20 years, the following 20 years, in pretty much anything. I mean, most people probably know the theme from this movie rather than the movie itself, I would say.
Oh yeah, the song is it's basically a meme at this point, I'd say. And like it's entirely possible that like younger people they don't connect it to the movie at all and like, just view it as, oh, it's that sad song, you know. But it's a pretty good song.
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, but I've seen it used well and used badly, I think. Used badly in memes and things which, like when you have like a reality show cliffhanger and then they put the song in to show drama. That's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's going into cringe territory.
Yeah, or like for sporting events. Well, I don't think anybody in any sporting event is going through the same drama that the characters in this movie are going through.
Yeah, I guess the guy who made it is collecting a lot of royalty from it because it's so widely used.
Yes, that's right.
What's his name? Clint Mansell. The song is called Lux Aeterna. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a Latin name. So if you don't know the song and want to look it up, that's what it's called.
Yeah, it's from this movie, okay? If you ever wondered where it started in this movie, and it's completely appropriate to the story and when it shows up. So there's all these solid innovations, and the film, as I think it's part of, I would say, Darren Aronofsky's style. It's very kind of formal, right? You can the filmmaking comes into the story itself, and in this story, it's because the movie is split in seasons, summer, fall, and winter, and I guess the mood of the film follows exactly the seasons. We never get to spring, so there's never and then we never get like the renewal and life and hope appearing again. It starts in summer, very bright ideas. The plans, the dreams of the title, and then it's like if you were to like to plot a line, it would just be kind of going down in terms of how badly things go for the characters.
Yeah, the whole seasonal theme. Yeah, I liked it. I think it's nice. It's very very poetic, I guess. And like some people don't like it when filmmakers like divide their movies into these hard chapters, I guess you could call it, with title cards and black screens and whatnot. But I think for this movie it's very fitting. And like it really works well together with all, the other editing techniques you've already mentioned, like the split screens, the rapid, time lapses. And it really works. But I guess you could say it's a bit of an over-edited movie, but like for me it worked.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, it's part of its period as well. Like the early 2000s, the indie filmmaking was really popular, and one way that indie filmmakers could kind of separate themselves from more mainstream films was to kind of be very innovative and try to break some ground in terms of techniques. Right, like right at the beginning of the movie, there's the part where they steal the TV, and we'll get to it in a minute. The part where they steal the TV, they're pushing the TV down the road because it's got wheels, of course, and the camera is on top of the TV and looking at the characters' faces as they push it down. This sort of kind of trying to make the most out of a scene in terms of where to place the camera, and doing stuff that you normally wouldn't see, right? Because this is a time when
True.
Like music videos were still a thing, for example, right? And music videos were very innovative because people could like try all sorts of different techniques. So I think this comes from that sort of indie tradition, if you will. But anyway, the story is not very indie, I guess, in that sense. It's not about kind of things going well. And as I said, you might think, because you see the seasons and you might think, well, we're going summer, fall, winter, which is going to be usually the low point of a drama where things are going very badly. And then, of course, there's spring when things kind of become good again. The end of the third act in a traditional screenplay structure. But spring never comes, things just end very badly. So we have four characters, Harry, Sara, Marion, and Tyrone. And they all have like big plans and all big dreams, and the story is about those plans just being squashed.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really in tune with the seasonal theme. Like everybody starts out in summer and they're trying to follow their dream, but since this is not really a story about growth, but it's more a story of decay. like stuff goes from good to worse to really, really bad in the end. And like we're gonna discuss the climax of the movie, of course, but those last 15 to 10 minutes in this movie, they are so intense. Like this movie is really, it's really a trip. I don't know how else to describe it. Like the whole the way the movie is structured, it kind of progressively speeds up in a way also, and that like heightens or it reaches its climax at the literal climax of the movie, where the scenes, we are jumping between different scenes all the time, and then it ends in a big bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as the other themes of the movie are concerned, it's not just following dreams, it's also, of course, about addiction, and not just drug addiction, but also TV addiction, which we're going to talk a little bit about when discussing the Sara character, and isolation and loneliness, and I guess also like the illusion of having control, and how that can spiral out of control and into very severe self-destruction.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the theme of the movie is about willpower, and these characters have these big dreams, and let's not play around, because some of these dreams are pretty bad, right? I mean, I mean, they at least 3 of the characters are trying to get to their goals by becoming drug dealers, right? So it's not it's not exactly it's not exactly the greatest of possible of dreams.
Yeah, and with the 4th character, with Sara, who's Harry's mother, she basically is an elderly woman. She's widowed. She basically sits at home most of the day and watches TV and eats sweets. And like her dream is just to be on TV once in her life. Like that's her dream, because she wants to be admired by her friends. So it's also not exactly the best dream to follow, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, they're normal people, I guess, in that way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her dreams are shaped by her environment, of course, and because she has nothing and sits at home and only has the TV and her friends, which she hangs out in front of the building sometimes. Like that's what her dream is. She wants to be on a talk show or a game show, I think it is.
Yeah, she's an interesting character because she's not alone. I mean, not on the face of it, because she lives in the building where a bunch of widowed women like her live, I guess. I don't know if they did it on purpose or not, but there's like at least like half a dozen other widows in that building who all kind of hang out. They get their chairs and put it on the front of the building during the day and spend the day there kind of talking to each other. But she's a bit of a narcissist, I would say, because she wants to stand out from that group. She wants to be better than them. They want those other women to look up to her. And that's where she kind of gets this call on the phone about being part of the TV show, being cast on the TV show she watches all the time. And I think it's like one of those kind of scam calls, maybe, where they kind of get you to send you details, and who knows what happens, right? You might have to spend some money to be a contestant. It's a bit sketchy, right? Yeah, she absolutely just grabs onto this idea, right? And then she gets everybody else, all the other women involved on it, because she wants to feel special. She wants to feel better than them.
Yeah, for her it's really about like being admired, being liked. And as for the phone call she gets, like it's never really resolved whether that was a scam or whether it's real or not. Like they sent her some paperwork or whatnot, I think. But spoilers, she never gets onto TV.
No.
And one of when she gets the call, she's super ecstatic, of course, and she decides that she wants to wear a special red dress, which I think she says she wore at Harry's graduation, probably high school graduation, because he's not that old in the movie. And she tries to put it on, but it doesn't fit anymore. Like she's too fat, and so she starts going on a diet, and doesn't really work, and she's a bit frustrated, and one of her lady friends recommends her a doctor, and that doctor prescribes her some quote-unquote weight loss pills, which are basically amphetamines. So she starts taking speed, and that's when things really start to go wrong for her.
Yeah, she. It's funny because when her son comes to visit, obviously he's a junkie, so he spots immediately that his mother is taking amphetamines because he's a drugs expert, right? So he looks at her and says, "Well, you're on amphetamines," because he's seen lots of people who are taking those. But for her, it doesn't really matter if it's amphetamines or not, right? Because she says, she confesses that she feels super lonely and she doesn't have like a reason to live, right? And she says, "I'm lonely, I'm old, my friends don't need me." And she wants to have like a sense of purpose in life. And I think this is like super interesting because when we talk about other topics, having like a meaning to life is a big thing, right? Is something that keeps people going. It's something that gives people direction. And I guess she doesn't have a job, so she lives on some sort of pension. She doesn't have like a husband to make happy. Her son barely visits, so she can't do anything for him. So it's like she can only create a meaning for herself if she can make herself kind of useful to other people, or in this case, impress other people. By herself, she cannot function as a full human being, which is, I think, pretty common for a lot of people, especially the times we're now, right?
Oh yeah, especially now, and of course in old age, that's also always a thing. Like once your partner dies and most of your friends have died, it gets really rough and really lonely. And I guess she isn't totally lonely, but she feels the loneliness, I guess, even though she is surrounded by all these other women who she befriends. But yeah, her son is also obviously pretty absent, and as you mentioned earlier, he basically only visits her out of a sense of obligation, or when he steals her TV again, because he's repeatedly stealing the TV to sell for money for drugs.
Yeah, it's funny because the movie starts with that thing, which is sort of comedic in a way. It's dramatic, but it's also a bit of a comedy when, like, the mother, Sara, she goes back to buy the TV from the pawn shop, and she's done it. She's bought the TV back over and over and over again. So that's a bit of comedy, but then the comedy in the movie just disappears and
it fades out.
It fades out. Like there's no jokes after a while. Yeah, yeah. Once you leave summer, the jokes are over. Any kind of joke is completely off the script.
Yeah, I guess we should talk about the trio, of course, the trio of friends. So we have Harry, who is played by Jared Leto. I think this was one of his first lead roles, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think I've seen him before in a lead role, or in a movie that's older where he had a lead role. There's his girlfriend Marion, who's played by Jennifer Connelly, and then there's Tyrone, who is Harry's best friend, and he's played by Marlon Wayans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they all have different dreams, right? But they all kind of take the same route for their dreams. Yeah, I mean, Harry, it's hard to tell what his dream is, except making it up to his mother, and then helping the others achieve their goals. But Harry's kind of goal just seems to be to get high on heroin.
Yeah, I guess it's also to be with his girlfriend. And, like open up this business they want to start together with his girlfriend.
Yeah, so they need money, right? And Tyrone, he has like a goal, which is not super apparent in the movie, which is to finally be able to leave the ghetto, right? To kind of leave
he tries to get out of the hood, basically.
Yeah.
And make his mom proud. His dead mom, unfortunately.
His dead mom proud. Yeah. There's a bit of that.
There's a bunch of like flashback / dream scenes in the movie, and with Tyrone, like it's usually him as a kid and about his mother. And with Harry, it's usually like there's a repeat dream sequence, which I guess we can talk a little bit about with Harry. And this one I also found interesting in the way it is constructed, because it uses like a fade out technique very nicely, where like a part of the building fades out, and then slowly the rest of the building also fades out, and you're out in the open by the ocean at some kind of pier. And Harry sees his girlfriend Marion in the distance, standing next to the sea, and he runs at her, and she turns around, and that sequence is later on at the climax of the movie repeated, but in a slightly different way. We're gonna get to that, of course.
Yeah, and it's interesting because all these characters, they all are I would say working class, except Marion. She comes from a family that actually has money, but for one reason or another, she wants nothing to do with them. So she instead of asking her family for money, she kind of goes into this, into the plan of the trio to sell drugs and make money and kind of achieve their dreams.
Yeah, it's never really spelled out why exactly she tries to get away from her parents or independent from her parents, but it is that they have money. Like there's one scene with Sara and Harry where I think Sara mentions that her family owns like a clothing business. They are making underwear or something like that. So they're definitely like bourgeois capital owner class, something like that. And they also pay for her pretty creepy psychiatrist who's called Arnold, which he doesn't like, but he still has to visit them. So in order that he doesn't call her parents on her, basically.
Yeah. So all three of them are hard drug users, and they start to become dealers, which, as most stories that start like this, it always ends up with them using their own product and kind of things going and making bad decisions because of being on drugs. And things kind of start going worse and worse after that. So there's a bit of success in the beginning where, they for example, they go and see the possible shops they could rent to start a boutique where, Tyrone is kind of climbing up the gangster life, and he's getting better contacts and meeting bigger dealers and kind of getting better product to sell and all that. But as soon as we go into the fall, literally the fall, but also the season fall, we all these plans kind of come apart. The Requiem begins, I guess.
Yeah, they're starting to deal heroin, of course, and start using heroin. It's actually Harry who introduces Marion to it, and she gets addicted, of course, like the rest of the two. And then there's a big drug bust that's happening, and Tyrone gets like caught in between. Like there's a shootout between like two rivaling gangs or something like that, and he tries to flee and gets picked up by the police, and that's really where the fall begins, because he goes to jail and Harry has to bail him out essentially, and has to spend all of their money. And after the drug bust, there's not much heroin left in the area apparently, so they all go on withdrawal for one, and they also obviously don't have any money anymore because they can't sell. So that's really the point in the movie in which like stuff goes south. Yeah,
but as bad as drugs are shown in this movie, and I was reading kind of people's comments to the movie, and people would say, wow, this is a great ad for not doing drugs. And of course we can tie this into Last Exit to Brooklyn, which we commented on last episode had like a very strong morality about it, right? All the kind of except for of course those little gangsters, the thugs, the small time thugs. Everybody else that kind of deviated from a sort of a nuclear family, steady job, well-defined gender roles. Everybody kind of got into lots of trouble. You could say this movie kind of follows that in a bit, in the sense that, don't do drugs, kids. You'll end up like these 3 losers or something. 4 losers if you count Sara with her amphetamines. But even though there's that moral aspect, the fact is, when they're on drugs, life is much more enjoyable for them than when they're off the drugs. And no matter how bad things get, when they shoot, everything is good again. So I'm not even sure this movie passes that message of, it's the best story ever told about not doing drugs. I think it's a bit more complex than that.
I think it's just showing what it is like, right? because I mean, I've never taken heroin, but I've done other drugs, and obviously when you're high, it feels good, right? And it's a form of escapism for these people, in a sense. The same way for Sara, initially, like, the TV is her form of escapism, so that she doesn't feel lonely any longer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the same way you can look at the drugs, but I guess the moral of the story is, of course, that you don't want to do what these 3-4 people are doing, right?
Yes.
It's not really I guess it's pretty on the nose, yeah. But it's not a cheap moralism, I think. Like, there's some genuine tragedy happening, right? And you're really feeling for these characters.
Yeah.
So it's not just like a government anti-drug ad that nobody takes seriously.
Yeah, it's a bit more subtle, I would say. And I mean, that's ultimately, these are kind of personal stories. I don't think they're supposed to mean anything beyond the characters themselves.
Oh yeah, I mean, the drug bust happened and their supply is dried up, and yeah, that's really the first time in the movie you see, like, the issues with drugs, of course, which is when you no longer have access to them and you're addicted. That creates trouble, right?
Yeah.
And for them, it's also, of course, because it's their source of income, and that really strains the relationship between Harry and Marion, especially. And Harry eventually is suggesting or pushing Marion to prostitute herself with her psychiatrist. And she's very reluctant, of course, in the beginning, but eventually she does it because the pressure from the withdrawal is just so much that she can't help it anymore, I guess. Yeah. And that is the beginning of the ruin of this relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, and then because there's supposed to be a big score coming into town, and they need money to buy some of it so they can score for themselves, and then of course sell it later. So that's why they need the money. But then they never manage to get these drugs because of an incident when it's trying to pick up, and then they really get desperate, and then they made terrible decisions and kind of everything go wrong. One thing which I found common between this movie and Last Exit to Brooklyn is that at no point nobody kind of gets a job, right? nobody decides, we need money, but let's follow this script that most people in society follow, right? And it doesn't really matter if you or I believe in the American dream or if we don't. Let's say that a lot of Americans, especially in 1978 when this was written, would have believed in the American dream, right? So they, it's legitimate to ask, why didn't they just get a job, right? You get home at night, you shoot your heroin, and then you wake up the next day, you go to work. There's lots of people who do that, right? The majority of drug users have a normal job, and they just do drugs,
I guess,
on the time off and somehow work their job around it somehow. But statistically, most people have a job, even drug users.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible, right? But I guess there's an argument to be made that these 3 are already too far gone, and that they maybe don't really know how to work, or how it doesn't even occur to them that they could take a regular job, right?
Yes, especially
they're so
Marion,
fixated
right?
on.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because she's
her dream is really just getting this designer clothes business started, and yeah
because she has a wealthy family, so if you have a wealthy family, it's much easier to get a nicer job, right? But it's never an option for them, and so there's that part also from Last Exit to Brooklyn where the kind of any deviation from a normal life script ends in ruin.
Yeah, I mean, all of these 3, like, they obviously come from, like, broken homes, I guess you can call it. Like, Harry grew up without a father, Tyrone lost his mother pretty early on. We don't know what's going on with his father, and Marion is at least estranged or alienated from her parents. So they're kind of funneled into this life in a way.
So Sara gets progressively more paranoid with her amphetamines, and she starts to really lose it. She starts kind of hallucinating her dead husband, hallucinating her fridge attacking her, which is funny if it wasn't dramatic.
yeah, that's one of the most hilarious but also like scariest scenes in the movie. But I love that one.
Yeah,
like they use again like this fade out technique where she's totally high watching TV, and I guess is feeling a little bit of hunger, or the TV starts suddenly moving and she looks at it, and like the front of the fridge is just fading out, and she sees all the stuff that's inside, and then stuff gets really crazy, and the hosts of the talk show she's watching come out of the TV, and the crowd in the movie is cheering, in the talk show is cheering her on to take another pill and stuff, and she completely loses it. Like it's a full-blown drug-induced psychosis.
Yeah, she rushes out of her apartment, and she runs in the street, kind of shouting like like what we would say when when we're walking around and we see somebody acting like this, we say, oh, that's a crazy person, right? And she's acting like a random crazy person for everybody else who's looking at her. But of course, we know her story. And this kind of was interesting to me, because often when we see, like a homeless person in the middle of the street kind of shouting or going through their own psychotic episode, we never kind of, well, at least I don't, kind of go in my mind through what led that person to that moment, right? And we see Sara on her journey from relative sanity, even though she was very kind of depressed, I guess, in the beginning, into this kind of full-blown public psychotic episode. And suddenly, instead of looking at her as an individual, we're looking at her through the eyes of the people who are trying to avoid her. And then later, when we go into kind of when she's taken in by the medics and paramedics and hospital staff, then we see her also through those eyes, right? And the bystander eyes. So it's really well done, because the random person on the street having a psychotic episode, we see them through our eyes of, oh, look, that's a random person that we never know nothing about having a psychotic episode. Let me avoid that person, right? Or if we're especially compassionate, we'll say, well, this person might hurt themselves, so let me call in the police or paramedics or an ambulance or something like that, right? But we never know where that person is coming from. And it's very interesting because we follow Sara so closely, and then all of a sudden, instead of having her point of view, right, which includes seeing her own hallucinations, we switch to the point of view of the paramedics, of the doctors, of the people who she's riding the subway with, etc., etc. And that's really interesting, because then we see this person, this crazy person, right, is actually a fully fledged human being who didn't arrive at this moment just by accident, right?
Yeah, I mean that's really like where the drama of the movie is, I think. And like it's a really nice is not the right word. It's a well executed sequence, I think. When she gets out of the house and she starts running around, and the perspective is switching from her perspective to the perspective of the bystanders, or like the pedestrians, I guess. And when you see, and there's one nice shot where you see her like kind of from the bird's eye view, and everyone around her moves really, really fast. Like Aronofsky again used like this time lapse technique, and she's moving normally. And like that is a really nice way of showing how, for her, this must feel like this total sense of confusion, and she doesn't know what's going on. Then, of course, when she runs into the TV station to ask when she's up, we see it from the eyes of the security and the lady at the desk, and then the paramedics and stuff, as you said.
This happens with the other characters as well, because we have all the other characters we following their journeys, kind of their point of view, and then suddenly they become the things looked at, right? They becoming ex or secondary characters in somebody else's story, right? Because, for example, there's the people taking care of Sara, and things go very grim for her. They kind of do electroconvulsive therapy on her. I actually did some research on this, and apparently doing ECT on people with amphetamine psychosis actually had some pretty good recovery rates. So
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, it's still a pretty widely used therapy method in psychiatry. Although, like the way it is portrayed in this movie, like where it's not under general anesthesia and with like very high voltage, I guess.
Yeah.
I doubt that this was legal at the time. If you assume the movie is set in the late 90s, and that's one of these anachronistic things.
Yeah.
Like maybe at the time the novel was written, like this was really
Yeah.
still how they would do it.
So she goes from like being a protagonist of her scenes, if you will, to becoming like instead of being a subject of her scenes, she becomes like an object of her scenes. Like stuff is done to her, right? Instead of her doing things and being led. And this happens to the other characters as well. Like Harry, he's got an intravenous abscess on his arm from shooting always on the same arm and on the same place. So obviously it's going to become infected and it's going to develop an abscess. And he has to have his arm amputated. And then all of a sudden, he's not the agent of his scenes, right? He's an object on his scenes. He's the person being operated on. The people on his scenes are the ones performing the actions, not him, right?
Yeah.
And the same that happens to Sara. Yeah.
Yeah. It happens to all the characters.
Yeah, to all of them.
Like at the same time where like Harry and Tyrone, they're on their way to Miami, I think, because they heard that down there they can buy heroin because there's a big batch coming in. And on the way down to Florida, that's when the stuff with his arm happens, and they stop at a hospital, and the doctor there is like a dick and calls the cops on them. But I'm not even sure if a doctor is allowed to do that. But anyways, it happens.
It's Florida. I think anything's possible. I think.
True. Florida man.
Yeah, Florida man.
Yeah, and at the same time, the stuff with Sara is happening, and Marion eventually, like the withdrawal gets so bad for her. She's left in Brooklyn on her own, and the withdrawal gets so bad that she eventually calls up like a pimp they've dealt with before. I think he's called Big Tim or something. Yeah, and first she prostitutes herself with him, and he invites her, quote unquote, to participate in a pretty degrading sex party, and that's also where like this objectification is happening, where she's not in control anymore, and she has things done to her.
Yeah.
Like she has no agency anymore.
Yeah, it happens to all of the characters, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Tyrone, he doesn't end up in hospital. He gets thrown in prison, where he gets abused by a prison guard who calls him racist names and is forced to do forced labor, also while in withdrawal. So he's also doesn't really have any agency anymore, and it's stuff that's being done to him.
Yeah, and the prison guard is actually Hubert Selby Jr., by the way.
Oh yeah, that's his cameo.
Yeah, it's a little cameo in the movie.
We missed mentioning the cameo on our last episode in Last Exit to Brooklyn, but he has one in that movie as well.
Yeah, he's driving a taxi, I think, right?
He's either the taxi driver or he is the guy who runs over the transgender character.
Oh, right, yes.
I'm not really sure which one it was.
Yeah.
But he's driving a car. That much I know.
Yeah, so anyway, all these people are trying to kind of have plans, dreams that involve using a lot of willpower, sell drugs without taking the drugs, stick to the diet, which is like not a lot of food, stick to a plan. So, for Marion, for example, which is, use the money only for buying fabric for the boutique and for, renting the space and everything like that. This, to stick to the plan. And they make these dreams who are way beyond their willpower and their capabilities, and they just crash. And they go from people who have dreams, who are kind of agents and in control of their life, to having no control over their life, any of the four. I don't think there's any big life lesson on this. It's just part and parcel of how things happen, right?
Yeah, it's just a really long like downwards spiral in a way, and it ends with everybody's dreams getting crushed.
Yeah,
and that is in the climax, which we've already been discussing a bit with Harry when he's in the hospital and his arm is getting taken off. The repeat dream sequence is happening, which I mentioned earlier, and this time he's also at the beach, but Marion isn't standing there. and he's a little bit confused and starts walking backwards, and he stumbles and falls down, calling her name, and that's really like emblematic of how the whole movie goes.
Yeah,
I think they were chasing after their dreams, thinking they're in control, but in reality they are not really in control.
Yeah,
and then eventually it all comes down in a big fall. Yeah.
Of course, the alternate version of this movie, speaking as a pessimist, philosophical pessimist, would be they all get their dreams, and then it doesn't leave them satisfied at all with how things turned out.
that would be even more cruel.
That would be even more cruel.
Yeah.
So Sara goes on TV, and she's there for like 2 minutes. She just, who's your name? I'm Sara from Brooklyn. Hello, Harry. So here's the quiz show question. She gets it wrong. Back to the audience, Sara. So that was your 30 seconds of fame.
And nobody of her friends remembers.
Yeah. Because at least these characters, because they lived in this very anachronistic time. I mean, a lot of people in the 2000s had at least a VCR recorder to record stuff on TV. Maybe none of her friends record it, or they miss it because it's broadcast at the wrong time or something. And then she goes back, and the loneliness is still there, right? It's
right.
And maybe Marion gets the money to open the shop, and for some reason or another, she opened it in the wrong neighborhood, or
maybe
her fashion sense is terrible, right?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe she's just a shitty designer,
yeah.
and nobody buys the stuff, and they go.
Or she doesn't understand how to run a business, and nobody buys it, and then instead of being a prostitute who has a dream of saying, well, one day I might get enough money to buy it, and then she just spends the rest of her life crushed. She's just hanging on to this dream, didn't work out, and then she has nothing to look forward to. And the same for the other characters, right? Maybe Tyrone leaves his segregated, well, not segregated as in openly segregated, but yeah, we know what it means, like kind of red-lined neighborhood. And he moves into finally managed to buy a property in a white suburb, and then all the neighbors shun him, right? Because
he's still isolated.
Yeah, still isolated, right? Still different, still segregated. So that would be the alternative, maybe even more horrific version of this movie. But that's probably more than 2 hours, I think.
Oh yeah, that would have been a whole another arc, and at that point it would probably have been a little bit too much.
Yeah, the true horror is getting what you want, right?
Yeah, that's true. It's true in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah, you get what you want.
The way the movie ends, the way the movie ends, it's still pretty much an all-around tragedy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not an excessively cruel version like we just dreamed up, but in the end, none of the characters achieved the dream, of course.
Yeah.
And all of them end up like broken, either in body, mind. It's either their freedom gets taken away or their dignity gets taken away, I guess, in case of Marion.
Yeah. In many ways, the things they wanted, it's interesting because I often like to think about how people express what they really, really want. What's deep down, what do they want, right? And sometimes I wonder, did Marion really wanted to open the shop, or did she just want to escape from her parents and prove that she could do something without their money, right? Or did kind of Sara really want to go on TV itself, or did she just want to feel important somehow or needed somehow, right? And sometimes I wonder if these kind of representations of what people want, which usually are created so they please the person who creates them, of course, but also the kind of society and the relationships around you, right? They need to be acceptable to the people around you, acceptable expressions for the people around you. Maybe Harry just wanted to get high, right? And
maybe, I mean, he's the only character in the movie, or one of the three at least, who apparently has a degree. So
yeah,
you can at least assume that he could have gotten a good job, maybe.
Yeah.
And the same for Marion, of course. I mean, with her privileged background, she probably wouldn't even have to need to work. Like, she could just ask her parents for the money she needs, right?
Yeah. Even for heroin, right?
Yeah.
or
yeah,
opening
of course.
the shop or whatever. So I'm often wondering if all these plans, all these dreams these characters make, and of course real flesh and blood people make, they're just kind of attempts at creating meaning, right? At creating a plan, something to do tomorrow, something to do right now. Because since people living in Brooklyn in the 2000s, they don't need to, they're not back at the. They're not hunter gatherers, right? They know where to find food. They're not going to be predated by saber-toothed tigers or whatever, or die from kind of basic diseases, right? So they need to create some kind of meaning, right? Beyond survival, and this dream needs to be big and something that requires steps and fills their time with stuff to do, right? It's just this idea of getting stuff to do. I mean, I do it myself. I'm doing it. I'm doing it right now. Actually, that's what having a dream is, right? You need something to occupy yourself and kill time. I guess doing a podcast
in a manner
for example.
which, for example, to feel like you're doing something productive with your life.
Yeah.
Even though that might not necessarily be true, like in the case with these 4 characters who get lured in to addiction and ever increasingly more troubles by their dreams.
Yeah, because Sara didn't want of anything, right? She had some sort of pension. She could buy things she wanted, right? She didn't seem to want any material things that she couldn't afford, right? She never talked about, I wish I could go on that cruise ship. She never talked about any of that. She seemed to be catered for, and her neighbors, the other kind of widowers on her building, they seem to be pleased with their lives, but that Sara needs to fill the gap, right? She needs to fill the gap with stuff, with stuff to do and to worry about, and to go on the scales, and one day being better than the previous day, right? And then the next day being better. In this case, measured in weight, weight decreasing. Having this idea that every day you being better than the previous day, right? You're, in her case, was losing weight, but it could be, the other characters putting the money in their stash, right? So the money is growing. So there's progress. There's life progressing. My energy is being spent on improving things, and this is a very human thing, and a very human anxiety that we have.
I don't think anybody is really free of that. Like everybody needs to have some kind of goal, because otherwise you literally go insane after a while.
Yeah.
If you're just doing nothing, right? That's really hard. And I guess if you're a Buddhist monk or something and you are intentionally trying to do nothing, that's something different.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard to do nothing. Assuming you're not a Buddhist monk.
Yeah, it's really not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And for those characters, like they're striving for something, and in both cases, like both with the trio and with Sara, yes, there is some material gain involved, like Sara, or material loss, I guess, because she's trying to lose weight, and the others are trying to get enough money. But like the root of the dream is it's an emotional need for something, like a connection with other people, I guess, because Sara, she wants to be admired by. She says this in one scene to Harry, that it would be so beautiful if she could be on TV and there's these millions of people looking at her, and that's this kind of fake connection that she's yearning for. And with Harry, it's just being with his girlfriend and making her happy, and with Tyrone, it's making his dead mom proud and kind of retroactively make a connection there, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the end, it all comes crashing down, and once more, like in Last Exit to Brooklyn, it becomes clear that you can't really escape these conditions you're living in by willpower alone, right?
Yeah.
And the drugs, and to some extent, in the beginning of the movie, for Sara, the TV, they offer like a fake escape route from these conditions.
Or the heroin.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Requiem for a Dream. It's a good movie. It was really big when it came out. It was like a big shock, and it set up kind of Darren Aronofsky's career from then on. He had already made like a big splash with Pi, which was like one of the
I forgot about that
the
one.
biggest one of the biggest indie movies. I mean, within indie movie capabilities of having a big audience, right? It was a big thing, and this movie was even bigger. For me, it was certainly big because I was pretty much the age of the characters when they came out. So
I saw it years later because in 2000 I was like, how old was I? 9 or 10.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't watch
I saw it
that
like
time.
in the. Oh no, would have traumatized me for life probably.
Yeah, when I watched that, I was like Harry's age, like, right? So it was like, although I never had plans to sell drugs to make money, or anything like that. But it was very easy to relate, and these kinds of stories usually didn't make it to movies that were this well shot, right?
True.
Yeah, it was more like
all the drug movies. I'm not even sure if drug movies, quote unquote, was really a thing before this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that probably during kind of mid-century America, you would have a lot of drug movies that were about, this is the tough life of a junkie, and just for that kind of appeal to normal people to see kind of the underside of society, right?
That's true.
But
and
not.
I guess you
not
also
like
had
this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess you also had like the stoner comedy stuff in the 80s and 70s. So I guess that's kind of the precursor to this movie. But this one is obviously it has some humor, but it's definitely not a comedy.
Yeah.
And what makes the movie, or what made it like so impactful on me emotionally, is that in the end there's no reconciliation whatsoever, and no real closure. Like, we don't learn what happens to Harry after he gets out of the hospital. We don't learn what's happening with Sara in the psychiatry, if she's ever going to able to be not psychotic anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's just nothing. Like, spring is missing.
Yeah, I just remember a movie about the drug use called The Man with the Golden Arm, 1955, starring Frank Sinatra as a recovering heroin addict who's coming out of jail and in prison, and he tries to straighten himself out by becoming a jazz drummer, or just a drummer, I think. And then he's really struggling not to kind of go back to morphine or heroin. It's never named which drug it is. See, that's mid-50s.
Yeah, I guess that would be a good basic plot skeleton for a Requiem for a Dream 2.
Yes, yeah, Harry.
The story of the four recovering from their addiction.
Yeah, except the man with the missing arm, not the golden arm.
Yeah.
And the golden arm, in this case, it means exactly the arm where he shoots drugs, by the way. But of course, it's 1955, so there's stuff you just couldn't talk about, right?
True.
Directed by Otto Preminger, so, it's a big thing. Nominated for 3 awards, 1955. Yeah, but there were not a lot of like serious movies about drugs. It was about, if they were about drugs, they were about the criminals, right? And shootouts and Scarface and whatever, that sort of thing. Not from this perspective.
True. And I also say, like, these movies, yes, they are about drugs, but like drug movie, I'm not even sure if this is like a proper genre.
No.
But I would say that, like, okay, movies like Trainspotting and Requiem for a Dream, they thematically and the way they are shot, they kind of fit into this mini subgenre, I guess, for me at least. But yeah, Requiem for a Dream, despite being 20 years old by now, which was kind of crazy to me when I started thinking about this, because it felt like I just watched this movie yesterday, the last time. And despite its age, I think it held up very, very well. A little bit better probably than Last Exit to Brooklyn, just because it's a little bit more recent. And it doesn't or hasn't lost its edge at all, I think.
Yeah, just imagine all those techniques they were premiering in this movie, instead of seeing all these techniques we mentioned as, oh, everybody does that in every movie, this is so cringe to watch. Just imagine they were doing it for the first time, right? So it doesn't look so dated if you take that perspective. So anyway, we'll be back next week. As usual, subscribe to our podcast on whatever directory you prefer, iTunes or Spotify. We're pretty much in all of them. Or maybe listening to us on YouTube, in which case it'd be great if you could subscribe. You can email us at voidwavepodcast@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on YouTube if that's your preferred one. And, feel free to suggest topics and ideas and things to talk about. We have a lot of material to go through. Just looking at the suggestions we've been receiving, we probably could do episodes until the end of 2020. But by all means, do suggest things and we'll kind of pick them up. And there's also a few other topics we want to discuss related to the antinatalist community and also to other communities we can interact with. So that's all from me. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed, and talk to you guys next week. Bye bye.